Everyone's heard of the famous assassinations of Abraham Lincoln, JFK, and MLK, to name a few. But what many people haven't heard of is the precursor to all those shootings and the first ever assassination of a head of state using a firearm. I'm of course talking about the assassination of William the Silent, the leader of the Dutch Revolt in 1584. In order to understand why and how this happened, a short explanation of the political landscape at the time needs to be provided. As previously mentioned, William the Silent, who is more commonly known as William of Orange in the Netherlands today, was the leader of the Dutch Revolt against the Spanish Habsburgs who had been ruling Netherlands at the time. During his lifetime, he led the Dutch to many victories against their overlords and kick-started the 80 Years' War, which eventually resulted in the formal independence of the Netherlands in 1648. While he was beloved by the people of the Netherlands, he unsurprisingly made many enemies whilst leading this revolt, especially amongst the Spanish Habsburgs, who were obviously trying to maintain their rule over the Netherlands. In an attempt to stop this revolt in its tracks, on the 15th of March 1580, King Philip, who was the head of the Spanish Habsburgs, and thus the King of Spain at the time, offered a reward of 25,000 crowns, peerage, and an inheritable estate to anyone who killed or captured William the Silent, to whom he referred in his decree as a pest on the whole of Christianity and the enemy of the human race. Unsurprisingly, this immense reward caught the attention of many people, one of which being a French man named Balthazar Gerard, who was a great admirer and subject of Philip. After the reward was published, Gerard left for Luxembourg, where he learned that Juan de Jaureguy had already been planning an assassination attempt, which ultimately failed, with himself being killed in the process. Now in Luxembourg, though, Gerard decided to enlist and serve in the army of the governor of Luxembourg for 2 years, in the hopes that he would be able to get close to William when the armies met. Unfortunately for him, though, that never happened, and he left the army in 1584. After leaving the army, he went to the Duke of Parma, an area in northern Italy, to present his plans. Although, understandably, the Duke had his doubts and was quite unimpressed with the plan. After some counsel and convincing, though, the Duke had become more hopeful of his success and provided him with some aid. With his newly found aid, he then left for the Netherlands to carry out his plot. He arrived in the Netherlands on Sunday, the 8th of July, 1584, where he made his way to the courtyard of the Prinsenhof, which was where the prince was living, and examined the premises. Seeing him waiting around, a halberdier asked him why he was waiting there. Gerard responded that in his present shabby clothing and without new shoes, he was unfit to join the congregation in the church opposite. Through an act of great kindness, the halberdier then arranged from the Prince of Orange himself a gift of 50 crowns for Gerard so he could buy some new clothes. Money which Gerard then used to buy a pair of pistols the following morning. With all his preparations made, on the 10th of July 1584, Gerard made his way to the prince's home, who was having dinner with a few guests that night. After William left the dining room and began to climb the stairs to the second floor, he was spoken to by the Welsh captain Roger Williams, who knelt before him. William then put his hand on the bowed head of the old captain, at which point Gerard jumped out of a dark corner, drew his weapons, and fired 2 shots at William, who subsequently collapsed. Shortly after this, the prince's sister knelt beside him, but it was too late, as he was already dead. The exact stories surrounding the last moments before William's death are unfortunately lost to history, but according to legend, he was asked whether he commended his soul to Christ, to which he answered yes. He was then said to have exclaimed, "My God, have mercy on me and on my poor people." Most modern historians agree that he couldn't have actually said this, though, as he would most likely died instantly from his wounds. But hey, that's no fun. Back to the story now, though. Following the shots being fired, Gerard fled through a side door and ran across a narrow lane, pursued by Roger Williams, the Welsh captain who had been kneeling before the prince at the time of the shots being fired. Gerard had intended to jump over the ramparts into the moat and make his way to the other side, where he had a saddled horse at the ready. Unfortunately for him, he wouldn't make it that far though, as he stumbled over a heap of rubbish, at which point a servant and a halberdier of the prince, who were also chasing him, caught up and detained him. When called a traitor by his captors, he is said to have replied, "I am no traitor, I am a loyal servant of my lord," to which his captors asked, "Which lord?" and he replied, "Of my lord and master, the King of Spain." He was then dragged back to the house under a rain of fists and beatings with the butt of a sword, which were nothing compared to the brutality he would be subjected to next. Predictably, he was speedily put on trial, obviously found guilty, and handed one of the, if not the most brutal sentence in human history, a testament to how much the prince was loved by his people. Now, before we get into what he was actually sentenced to, I feel a trigger warning is necessary, given the sheer brutality of this. I'm not someone who's ever really been affected by this sort of thing, but this sentence and what was done to him shocks and horrifies even me. But with that little disclaimer out the way, let's proceed, shall we? At his trial, the magistrates decreed that the right hand of Gerard should be burned off with a red-hot iron, that his flesh should be torn from his bones with pincers in 6 different places, that he should be quartered and disemboweled alive, his heart torn from his bosom and flung in his face, and that finally his head should be taken off. Also, I forgot to mention that was only the actual execution. He was also sentenced to torture of astonishing brutality. On the first night of his imprisonment, Gerard was hung on a pole and lashed with a whip, the wounds from which were then smeared with honey, and a goat was brought in to lick the honey off his skin with its rough tongue. After several other forms of torture for the night, he was left with his hands and feet bound together like a bull, so sleep would be difficult. During the following 3 days, he was repeatedly mocked and hung on a pole with his hands tied behind his back. Then, a weight of 300 metric pounds, or 150 kilos, was attached to each of his big toes for half an hour. After this, he was fitted with shoes made of well-oiled, uncured dog skin, which were 2 fingers shorter than his feet. Once they had managed to squeeze these tiny shoes onto his feet, he was put before a fire. When the shoes warmed up from the flames, they contracted, crushing the feet inside them to stumps in the process. The shoes were then removed, tearing his half-broiled skin off with them. After this, his feet were unsurprisingly damaged to a point they couldn't be mutilated any further, so they also branded his armpits. He was then also dressed in a shirt soaked in alcohol, and lastly, burning bacon fat was poured over him, and sharp nails were stuck between the flesh and nails of his hands and feet. It is horrifying that he was put through all of this over the course of 4 days, before finally, on the 14th of July, 1584, he was almost mercifully at this point executed in the previously mentioned fashion. After his decapitation, his head was then displayed on a pike behind the Prinzenhof, the house where the prince had been assassinated, and his arms and legs were displayed on 4 gates of the city. Well, that's going to be it for the video. Sorry to end it on such a gruesome note, but that is history sometimes. I don't want to say if you enjoyed this given the video's content, but if you found it interesting, I'd appreciate it if you liked and subscribed if you'd like to see more videos like this from me. With all that being said though, I hope you guys have a great day, night, wherever you are, and I hope to see you lovely people in the next one.